a subject which has aroused great interest in India and I think a great deal of interest outside India as well. Not only among Indians, but I think among a lot of people. I think the Wall Street movement to some extent has also been influenced by what has happened in India in this anti-corruption movement. But in order to understand this movement, I think we need to backtrack a little bit to understand what was the background which led to this movement. And in particular, the state of corruption in India, the causes and the effects that corruption has been having in India. But to backtrack even a little further, let's get a quick glimpse of the state of affairs in India in general in order to understand the connections between corruption and the state of affairs prevailing there. While the government and the Prime Minister of India keep talking about having achieved a 9% GDP growth rate and that India is on its way to becoming an economic superpower, if you scratch beneath the surface and look at the state or the conditions of the common people of the country, you see a very different picture. While it is true that progress has been made, rapid progress has been made in many areas, and in particular communications and information technology, but if you look at the condition of the common people in the country, you find, as the Arjun Sen Gupta report says, 78% of the people in the country live on less than 20 rupees a day. That's hardly enough to buy even 2 square meals a day. More than 200,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last decade or so. That's an unprecedented, mind-boggling figure. On the other hand, we see environmental degradation growing at a very alarming pace in India. We also see social conflicts brewing up all over the country, particularly in the tribal areas or the tribal states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Odisha, where there is a very strong Maoist movement, which the Prime Minister calls the single biggest internal security threat to the country. If you want to understand the connections between what is happening and corruption, I think it's instructive to look at one case study, and which is, let us look at the mining of mineral resources in the country. Now, prior to 1991, that is prior to economic liberalization in India, mining of natural resources or mineral resources was exclusively reserved for the state sector. It was not allowed to the private sector for profit. But after economic liberalization, it has been opened up and large number of mining leases have been granted to private corporations who are rapidly extracting the mineral wealth of the country and mostly exporting it out of the country at huge profits. In fact, Justice Santosh Hegde, the Lok Ayukt of Karnataka, in a recent voluminous report on iron ore mining in Karnataka, has tried to analyze the economics of this mining, and he has found that at a cost of only 600 rupees a ton, 300 rupees a ton for extracting the ore, 300 to transport the ore to the state, to the port, these mining corporations are getting 6,000 rupees a ton by way of revenue by selling that iron ore. That's a 900% profit on their cost. The royalty that they pay to the Indian government is was just 27 rupees a ton earlier. It has now been increased to 61 rupees a ton, which is less than 1% of the revenue. Now, the total revenue involved in the mining activity is certainly added to the GDP, leading to increase in GDP growth. In fact, the bauxite reserves in Odisha alone are estimated to be $2.2 trillion. If that were to be allowed to be given to private corporations, which the state government has been trying to do, for unbridled mining, we could see a 10% GDP growth in the country just on account of bauxite mining in the state of Odisha alone, because that entire $2.2 trillion worth of bauxite can be extracted in just 20 years. Justice Santosh Hegde in his report has also pointed out that if iron ore extraction in Karnataka goes on at the present rate, those reserves, which are the richest iron ore reserves in the country, would be over in less than 20 years, leaving nothing for the future generations. Now let us see what this GDP growth by way of mining of mineral resources is doing for the people of the country. In the first place, you have to displace all the people living on the land above those mineral resources. Most of these resources are in forest areas where the tribals live. So in the first place, you have to displace all these tribals, involuntarily displace them, which means cutting them off from their source of livelihood, because they are dependent upon this land and forest for their livelihood, which means that they either move away and starve to death, because they hardly get any compensation. Certainly the compensation is not enough for them to earn any alternative livelihood. They are not in a position to move out to the cities and get jobs there. So therefore, either they just move away and starve to death, or they fight to retain their land. And in large parts of the country, there are huge resistance movements that are going on of these indigenous people fighting to retain their land. This land which is being given to this POSCO, the Korean company, the steel giant, there is a huge resistance movement going on, which has led to several attempts by the government to violently remove them by using force, by firing on them or lathi charging them, but still those people have held their ground. But if the government does manage to use force to evict them, those people again have two choices, which is either starve to death or pick up arms and join the Maoists. And therefore a large number of them have indeed picked up arms and joined the Maoists, and which is why the strength of the Maoists has grown in the country. So one impact, the immediate impact of this is that you are condemning a very large number of people to starvation, or forcing them to join the Maoists and thus become what the Prime Minister considers the single greatest internal security threat to the country. At the second level, of course, you are removing all the mineral resources of the country, leaving nothing for the future generations. While the revenue of mining is added to the GDP, the loss of your natural wealth is not deducted from your GDP. Then you are devastating the environment, because first you have to cut the forests, then you have to, and very often these mineral resources contain, they are the aquifers from where all the rivers of that region flow. There are bauxite mountains in Odisha, which are the sources of all the rivers of Odisha. You are destroying the water sources, you are polluting the remaining water bodies, because this is a highly polluting activity, leaving the water undrinkable, and you are causing air pollution. And what do the people get? Some of them get employment in this mining industry, but the number of people who get employment is less than the number of people who are displaced, who are cut off from their livelihoods. And the employment is back-breaking, health-destroying. So, you have adopted, now let us see what is the connection between corruption and this. So, when you have adopted policies by which you have allowed capital resources, that is the mineral wealth of the country, the natural wealth of the country, to be just transferred to private corporations for profit, and when the margin of profit in that is 900% in that activity, and when you give it for a song just getting 1% by way of royalty, then obviously you have created a situation where there can be enormous rent seeking or bribe taking and giving. And that is what has indeed happened. In fact, this mining activity, the last consequence of this is that it has created a criminal, corrupt mafia in the country which sits on top of the entire ruling establishment and indeed controls the entire ruling establishment in the country and has become the single greatest threat to democracy in the country. Recently, the mining barons who control iron ore mining in Karnataka, the Reddy brothers, who have now been arrested because of a court case that we had filed and the orders of the Supreme Court. Earlier, when the chief minister, they were ministers in the cabinet and they were controlling the entire mining. Everything was controlled by them. The transportation of the extraction, even though a large number of companies were involved in that mining, but they had become kind of the mafia there because they were the biggest people involved in that mining operation, and through their money power they had come to control everything. And when the chief minister tried to remove them from the cabinet, they took away more than half the MLAs with them, as a result of which the government was going to fall. And therefore, eventually the chief minister had to come on his bended knees and beg their forgiveness and take them back in the cabinet. So as I said, this has become a mafia, and this I am just giving one example, but there are a large number of such corporations which have become almost mafia type of corporations which exercise so much influence over the government that they control the postings of the ministers who will become a minister in the sector in which they are interested. This 2G scam has shown that they control who will be made the minister, they decide who will be made the secretaries of their department, they decide who will be made the regulators, and they control the media as well. So therefore, now why were these policies adopted of allowing the mineral wealth of the country to be plundered for just private profits? This was adopted precisely because the companies which were eyeing these mineral resources could bribe these ministers. And they have in turn created huge incentives for corruption. Because when the government is in a position to transfer capital assets worth tens of billions of dollars for a song to private corporations, you have obviously created a system which has built into it huge incentives for bribery. And this is just one example.